Hello, my name is Ian Beabout, and welcome to my YouTube channel. I've had a couple of requests to rank the Steven Wilson Jethro Tull mixes. Before I get into the ranking, I wanted to kind of let you know what the criteria are. I was trying to look at this from the point of view of you folks, the consumer. Those of you who are looking to spend a little bit of your extra hard-earned cash, and where I think that hard-earned cash would be best spent. So I'm looking at this from the point of view of somebody who is maybe not a super huge Jethro Tull fan, maybe just knows a couple of albums. When I'm ranking, I'm thinking that this is the least essential, or perhaps least representative, and then number one would be perhaps the most essential. A major consideration is the experience. This could be exemplified by what is known as the demo disc. You have your friends over and somebody says, okay, what does this surround sound thing sound like? Give me an example. Well, you might consider that the things on the bottom of this list is something I would be least likely to show to a newbie, whereas the top of the list, these are going to be the demo discs. Show these to your friends. So starting at, we're going to call this number 14, I have the debut album. This Was. So why do I have this as my least favorite Steven Wilson mix? It has nothing to do with the quality of the mix itself. Actually, the quality of all of these mixes is excellent, and I would argue that all of these mixes sound better than the original, so they're all worth getting. I have This Was as my least favorite simply because it's a 4-track recording. It's not even an 8-track recording like the next two records were. As such, there's very limited opportunity for immersion. And it often comes across as just a stereo mix with some extra stuff coming in the back. But I would never recommend This Was as an essential purchase. Not to mention the fact that aside from a few tracks here and there, I don't really think of this as a great Jethro Tull album. I like My Sunday Feeling, I like Beggar's Farm, I like Serenade to a Cuckoo, I like Dharma for One, and I like A Song for Jeffrey, but there isn't a lot of texture. And I think with these albums that are higher on the list, they tend to be the more textured albums. So number 14, we have This Was. It's a great mix. It sounds amazing. It's better than the original mix. It's just not what I would call a great surround sound mix. Number 13 is Stand Up. And I actually think that the distance between this and the first album is enormous. And this album sounds a lot better. Part of that is due to the fact that it is an 8-track recording. But like the follow-up, Benefit, there's very little definition, especially to the drums, where you don't have much kick activity. It's a great sounding mix. It's just not one of the ones that I would reach for in terms of a surround mix. I do think, again, it is an improvement. I think Benefit, for what it is, and it is another 8-track recording, is a lot more immersive. There's a lot more interesting stuff going on, especially with the opening track, with You There to Help Me. A lot of those backwards flute overdubs coming from the back of the room. And I think that given that he only had 8 channels to work with, Steven Wilson was able to do something really nice with this record, and I do recommend it. There's just 11 more above it that I like better. So at number 11, I have Thick as a Brick. It's a great sounding mix. And again, it's a vast improvement over the original. I just don't find that there's as much overdubs to play with. A lot of times what you're hearing is just the band. It's not as great of an experience as many of the records that are above it. You can hear all the drums separated out. The snare sounds very clear. The tom-toms sound great. The kick drum's always present. I do find I have some issues with the way that the drums were recorded on this album. They don't punch the way that I would like them to, in the way that Barry Barlow's drums definitely do on the follow-up, A Passion Play. At number 10, I have A. This is the 1980 album, and it was the first true departure from the Jethro Tull sound, even though they have always been a little bit experimental, a little bit all over the place in terms of their influences. A is another one that I think is vastly improved by the remix. This one never sounded very good. There was something wrong with the tapes that they were using. And as they were recording, the oxide was falling off of the tape. And so the whole album, when it got to the mastering stage, had this very dull, very murky sound quality. And Steven Wilson has gone a long way toward cleaning that up. What holds this back a little bit for me is that you can still tell that the oxide problem is there. You can still hear that songs like Batteries Not Included have no punchiness. I think Steven Wilson did a wonderful job with what he had. I think that there's some great opportunities for fun and surround sound and making this into an experience. I just think that the source holds it back from being one of my absolute top favorites. It's an essential purchase over the original mix, let me say that. I just think that there are 9, again, that are better overall experiences. That brings us to our number 9, which is the Broadsword and the Beast. This is one of my absolute favorite box sets, period. And if we were ranking the box sets, I think this might be my number 1, simply because of what's included. But since we're just talking about the album mixes, I feel that Broadsword and the Beast, there's just a few moments where I wish there were things that were louder in the mix, because they were louder in the mix on the original. Things like the mandolin overdubs in Fallen on Hard Times, which are practically buried in the Steven Wilson surround sound mix. They were much louder in the original mix, and even though I think that Broadsword and the Beast overall is an improvement, this is one of those albums that didn't sound bad to begin with. So I'm not sure how much of an improvement over the original mix it really is. It definitely does sound great. Oftentimes those little details, those small little things hold it back for me. However, if we were ranking the box set as a whole, I think it might actually be my favorite box set, simply because the second disc sounds so much better than the original mixes. There's just no comparison. And I'm talking about the Nightcap and 20th anniversary box set material that had been previously released. There's a uniformity to the 1981 and 1982 sessions that we've never had before. It all sounds like it's part of the same piece. I would say that this one and A are very close. A is the greater upgrade over the original mix, but Broadsword and the Beast does sound better overall, and I think is a more satisfying surround sound experience, despite the fact that I have some reservations about certain tracks. So this is number 8, Minstrel in the Gallery. I'll be honest with you folks, I think that you, the viewers at home, like this album more than I do. It's not like one of my favorite Jethro Tull albums, which could affect its ranking, because I think I might actually like everything else on the list so far better, with the exception of maybe This Was. It's good. It certainly has its moments. What kind of holds this one back for me is the lack of involvement with the other guys. Minstrel in the Gallery often comes across as an Ian Anderson solo album to me, but that has nothing to do with its ranking. And the reason why it's at number 9 is because I do think it's a terrific improvement over the original mix, which always sounded downright awful to me, especially the bass placement being oftentimes on one side or the other, and sometimes in the middle, but not always. I think that what this surround mix has proven is that it was a well-recorded album, and there is a lot of detail to it. And I think that of all of them, it might be one of the better overall improvements in terms of sonics and fidelity. And you can really hear the rawness of this recording, which I like. Songs like Cold Wind to Valhalla and Baker Street Muse especially really benefit from the greater clarity and the discreteness that 5.1 surround sound can offer. At number 7, WarChild. I did do a review of this album not too long ago that you can check out if you want to. I feel like this is a more textured album. Again, there's a lot more overdubs, not just strings, because the Minstrel in the Gallery album is basically just Tull plus strings. Whereas this album, it has strings, it has accordion, has soprano saxophone, there's harp, there's bagpipes, little details that you may not even catch every time you hear it. You can listen to this album in surround sound a million times, I feel like, and you're always going to hear something new. That's why it ranks higher to me than Minstrel in the Gallery. Even the beginning of this album. See, I think that the way an album starts, especially in surround sound, is a big deal. I have mentioned this before, that I like it when a surround or Atmos mix declares itself such within the first few seconds, and this album is no exception. When you hear the voice saying, "Would you like some tea, dear?" and the war sounds going on behind you, it completely places you within the three-dimensional space of the album within the first few seconds, and that immersiveness lasts for the entire duration of the record. I think this is one of Wilson's better mixes overall. It helps that it always sounded better than Minstrel in the Gallery, so maybe that gives it an unfair advantage. It's not as much of an improvement over the original mix as Minstrel in the Gallery, but I think overall it's a much more satisfying surround sound experience. And so far, I think of the titles mentioned, it's the most satisfying surround sound experience. So we're getting to the point here where things are going to start getting really close, and a lot of this is going to be entirely based around objectivity and just personal preference. You may not agree with me on these next couple, but hey, that's why it's my list. That's why it's my opinion. But again, once we get into the top 5, top 6, top 7, they're really close. Heavy Horses. I did do a review of this recently that you can check out if you want to hear more about it. This album, again, is one of the most textured and complex albums from an arrangement point of view. It's also got great music, wall-to-wall excellence. I think that this is Jethro Tull at their peak. I just think that Steven Wilson's mix does a wonderful job of putting you within this world of Heavy Horses. It's also one of the most improved. The original mix of this never sounded too great to me. It was always a little murky, but you can hear so much detail, especially in the surround mix, and it makes these performances come to life. I just love it. This is one that I could listen to again and again and again, and have. I think the top 6 are all essential if you love this music. Moving on to number 5, we have Songs from the Wood. So why is Songs from the Wood above Heavy Horses? I think it was recorded better to begin with. That helps a lot. But also, I just think that there's more going on. And this is exemplified by the fact that Dee Palmer and Martin Barr both have writing credits on this album. I think that that makes it a lot more of a group effort. So you have things in the texture on this album that you wouldn't necessarily hear on other albums, like some of the medieval drumming that appears on songs like Velvet Green. I would be remiss if I didn't mention the portative pipe organ that Dee Palmer used that allows for some just amazing opportunities in surround sound. I would point to songs like Velvet Green as being demo quality. Like, you could put that on and show your friends what surround sound can do. I was listening to Pibroch the 9-minute piece that opens with the guitars that sound like bagpipes, and that song is just incredible in surround sound. The world that this puts you in with the guitars floating all around the room, and then the actual song itself, the cap in hand portion, having a lot of opportunities for immersion, particularly in the extended instrumental section, where again you have a lot of the organ tracks. I was just sitting there listening to this thinking, this is some of Steven Wilson's best work ever. It's not as much of an improvement over the original mix, because quite frankly, Songs from the Wood always sounded great. Even the original mix sounds great. I just think that Steven Wilson's mix sounds even better. There's a lot more bass presence in his mix that makes this album feel more like a rock album. It is a folk rock album, but I feel like the rock is more underlined. In the new mix, it's got a lot of power. Folks, I would put this up with like Dark Side of the Moon as being just one of the all-time great albums, period. There's a lot to enjoy here if surround sound is your thing, and I think Wilson's mixing is some of his best. So before we move on to the final 4 in my Steven Wilson Jethro Tull remix ranking, I wanted to take a moment and remind you that according to my analytics, about 70 to 90% of my viewers aren't subscribers. And if you are watching this and are enjoying it and would like to hear more from me, I suggest that you not only like the video, but you also subscribe to the channel. This will give you future updates. I talk about Jethro Tull quite often. In fact, probably the next thing I'm going to do at some point is I'm going to do a deep dive into the Songs from the Wood box set and also the Minstrel in the Gallery box set. Both of those have been requested by viewers. So if you want to keep up on that stuff, you might want to subscribe. I also just talk about surround sound content in general and a lot of classic bands. I'm going to do a conversation about Frank Zappa's Apostrophe soon. Also very soon I'm going to be reviewing the XTC Skylarking Atmos, as well as the Storm Corrosion Atmos release. Just look for those if you're interested. Okay, now back to the ranking. So a couple of these in the top 4 are probably going to surprise you. And again, this is mostly down to personal preference. My favorite Tull records have not always been the most popular Tull records. We're all different. I guess that's what makes us unique. But at number 4, Too Old to Rock and Roll, Too Young to Die. So why is this my number 4? Well, my criteria include improvement over the original mix and just overall experience in surround sound. Too Old to Rock and Roll, Too Young to Die has always been one of my favorite Jethro Tull records. I know that a lot of people don't seem to see it that way. It's sort of in the way that Thick as a Brick was a send-up of prog rock. Too Old to Rock and Roll, Too Young to Die is a send-up of glam rock. And I would almost see this as Ziggy Stardust's weird cousin, or even a parody of Ziggy Stardust. A song like Big Dipper, play that next to Starman sometime, and aesthetically they're so similar, which I find a lot of fun. It's also very song-based, which was different for them at the time. It's not so proggy. However, the reason for me picking this is that it's a completely new performance of this album that was recorded back in the day and didn't see the light until this box set. And I think the new performance is a lot better than the original album performance. I think it's recorded better. I think it's got better energy. And it really makes some of these songs, which I think are actually some of the band's best, it makes them really shine. As a surround mix, it's fantastic. You really feel like you're there with them in the room, listening to them play. To make things even better, they actually included the TV special where they're miming. It does give one the sense that you are watching a movie or even a music video, and I think that that helps a lot with the immersion into this world. It's such a fun album, and the new version and the mix of the new version sounds phenomenal. This was almost my number one. And again, that might be down to completely personal preference, but I love this album. That brings us to our number 3, which is a passion play. And I did make a video here recently where I said that this was my favorite Jethro Tull album. And that's true. It historically has been my favorite Jethro Tull album. Now, recently there might be one or two that come really close, such as Heavy Horses or Stormwatch or even Too Old to Rock and Roll, Too Young to Die. In the intervening years, I've come to love those just as much. The reason why it ranks high on this list in particular is because I feel that Steven Wilson's work in surround sound decluttered it quite a bit. He took a passion play back down to its essence, its basic parts. This makes it a better album to me. And I always did love it, but I really think his mix makes it a better album in much the same way that his presentation of Too Old to Rock and Roll made it a better album. This isn't a new recording. It's the same performances, but by decluttering it, by taking it back to its essence and component parts, he makes this album come to life. It really does sound like a live recording of the band. It's less murky, but at the same time, his use of reverb allows the album to retain its signature. It doesn't sound like it's a new album or anything like that. It just sounds like it's been cleaned up considerably. Also, here's a little controversy, just to spark a little bit of activity in the comments. I like this album better than Thick as a Brick. I listened to them side by side over the weekend, and I don't even think it's close. I think this is a much better paced album. I think that it's actually, in a lot of ways, a much more memorable album, for me anyway. And I particularly point to the second side of both of these albums, respectively. Do You Believe in the Day? That section of Thick as a Brick is one of my favorite sections of Tull music ever, but I feel like there needed to be more contrast and relief, better pacing, because when I listen to Thick as a Brick, I often feel exhausted by the time it's over with. A passion play, on the other hand, I feel is much better with pacing, which means by the time I get to the end of it, I don't feel as worn out. It actually leaves me wanting more. I'm not sure why Thick as a Brick has the reputation that it does, and this one has the reputation that it does, because I actually think A Passion Play is the better album overall. I don't know how much of this is a hot take. You're going to have to let me know how you rank them in the comments section. I would really love to start a discussion about that. Let's not just hear my opinion. Let's hear yours too. But we've reached number 2. Number 2 is one of my favorite Jethro Tull albums of all time, and that is Stormwatch, the 1979 album. Most folks would say that Stormwatch is not only the end of the 70s Jethro Tull, which it is, but oftentimes people lump it in with the folk trilogy of Songs from the Wood, Heavy Horses. This is more like folk rock approaching hard rock, and there's even bits of it that to my ear are predicting A. Like I find this album, A, and Broadsword and the Beast to be a more coherent trilogy. The reason why it's number 2 on the list is because I always had this perception that Stormwatch was poorly recorded compared to Songs from the Wood and Heavy Horses, because the original mix was always so brittle and icy. And I know that the album, that fits the album, but I always felt like it was too much. It was to the point where it was difficult to listen to and really to warm to. But I think that Steven Wilson's work on Stormwatch has revealed that it was excellently recorded. It's actually one of the most warm and inviting mixes of all. It's astounding. Just get this thing and turn it up loud and listen to it, and you're not going to believe what you hear, especially if you're only familiar with the original mix. As a surround sound experience, I think this is a great demo disc, especially songs like Dark Ages, which are absolutely amazing. Things rolling around the room, the orchestra in the back, guitar overdubs coming from all around. You have songs like Old Ghosts, or even Dun Ringel, where Ian Anderson's vocal delay is spreading all around the room. I mean, this could have been number one. Number one and number two are so close, and they're there for a reason, and that's that they are a vast, vast improvement, revelatory improvement over the original mixes. If you haven't guessed it, my number one is Aqualung. For a lot of people, this is the album for Jethro Tull. It's not my favorite Jethro Tull album. In fact, I don't love the title track. I never particularly have. I kind of perk up when the solo comes on, but aside from that, Aqualung, the title track, doesn't do that much for me, I'm afraid, even though it's their most popular song. And Jethro Tull are my favorite band. I could say the same for Wind Up. I like it lyrically, I guess, but musically, it's a bit too straight ahead rock and roll for me. I like things to be more on the art rock side of things, more creative and experimental. That being said, the reason why Aqualung is number one in my Steven Wilson surround mix ranking is that it is a vast, huge, enormous improvement over the original, which is another album, again, that I always thought was poorly recorded. And I still kind of think it was poorly recorded. They were doing this at the same time and in the same studio as Led Zeppelin were recording Led Zeppelin 4. Led Zeppelin got the better studio. And Tull were stuck in this very cavernous place that used to be a church. And I think some of that does translate into the album. Wilson has rehabilitated it completely. For a lot of people, I think that this was the first time that they came across Wilson's work, and I think that the importance of that needs to be acknowledged in this list. This was the one that did it for me and for a lot of people who were on the fence about the idea of remixing the Jethro Tull albums, thinking that they shouldn't be touched. There was no way they could really be improved. When I heard this for the first time, I was won over. And we're talking about stereo. I didn't even hear it in surround sound until the last couple of years. But just the stereo mix alone was enough of an improvement that it made the remaining 13 albums possible, in my opinion. 14 if you count Bursting Out. Aqualung made these possible. I think for a lot of people, it put Steven Wilson on their radar. I would say this album and Court of the Crimson King are really what made Steven Wilson into who he is today. It has to be my number one. In terms of a surround mix, put on Cross-Eyed Mary. Cross-Eyed Mary sounds terrific. Up to Me, that's another song that is just, it's incredible. Or even a song like My God, the flute solo with all those reverb background vocals behind your head and the flute swirling around the room. It's a perfect way to demonstrate your surround sound system, and it's an incredible upgrade. I may prefer albums like Stormwatch or Passion Play or Too Old to Rock and Roll, Too Young to Die, but just simply based on the importance and the fact that this album kicked off the entire reissue program, that needs to be commended. And that's why Aqualung is number one on this list. So next, I'm going to do the live mixes. So that is going to depend a lot on how this video performs. Again, if you enjoyed it, don't forget to leave it a like, which is a thumbs up button, comment, but the most important thing to show that this was worth doing and that a live mix video is something that you would want is to subscribe to the channel. And if I do end up doing that, you'll be the first to know. All right, that's it for me for today. Once again, my name's Ian Beabout, and we will talk real soon. Bye-bye.